Academy Award nominee Liz Garbus is the director of Fischer Against the World, her documentary about former world champion chess player from the U.S. turned fugitive. Here's a clip from the film.
From very young, he was really living for chess. Even when he was eating, he would always have a chess board with him and study new variations.
That love component is such an enormous part of the achievement of any kind of genius, because if it's dutiful, there's no way you can be that obsessive about it. There was nothing else he would rather do.
Liz Garbus, thank you for joining us at CBSNews.com.
Thank you for having me.
So what inspired you to make a film about Bobby Fischer after all of these years?
On January 18th, 2008, I was on an airplane going to the Sundance Film Festival, and front page of the New York Times was Bobby Fischer's obituary. I knew something about Bobby Fischer the way I think all of us know something about Bobby Fischer, but as I started to read the story, I realized there was so much more to it, and I kind of became obsessed with finding out more, and by the time I was off the plane, I was convinced I wanted to make this my next project.
And in your process of collecting materials and doing some research, what was the picture that started to come through for the film?
Bobby was an amazingly complex person. On the one hand, he was a celebrity rock star who liked the limelight. He liked going to sit on talk shows and talk about how he wanted to demolish the Russians and beat them and crush other men's egos. On the other hand, he was reclusive and reluctant and sort of socially awkward. At various periods in his life, these different sides of him were sort of augmented and brought out. You know, that killer champion side was brought out leading to 72 when he met Boris Spassky in the match of the century, which was really, you know, took on huge cultural significance because it was the U.S. versus their mortal enemy, the Soviets, who had dominated the sport for decades. And, you know, later in life, of course, the other side of Bobby Fischer, which was far more socially undeveloped, was what flourished.
And in 1972, Bobby Fischer made chess front page news.
Bobby Fischer made chess front page news. I mean, it was the first story on the nightly news that would bump even Watergate to the second story.
And we're talking in an age without Twitter and Facebook. You know, we're talking about people standing in front of storefront television sets, right?
Right, people standing in front of the department stores' TV sets to watch the chess match, you know, on the ticker in Times Square to find out, oh, pawn to, you know, king 4. I mean, you know, just the minutia of chess was, you know, every moment of it was hung on like, you know, the most important story of the day.
And so I guess how would you characterize Bobby Fischer's fame? Were people in love with his brilliant mind? Did people find him a sex symbol in some way? What was the sense of how his fame became real for people?
I think Bobby encapsulated the American mythology of the individual self-taught, although he wasn't totally self-taught, but this is how he appeared, rising up, you know, like a weed through the cracks of a poor family in Brooklyn to become kind of a global superstar who was then ready to be a cold warrior and defeat our mortal enemy, you know, the Soviet Union. Of course, Bobby Fischer was far more complicated than that, you know, iconic description of him, but that's what he represented for people. And he was good looking, he had charisma, so he, you know, he inhabited that rock star role for a time very comfortably. But Bobby Fischer really took on, you know, great cultural significance because of his place in the Cold War. He put chess on the map. People began to experience, you know, to appreciate chess. And chess is war over the board. You know, chess is two opposing armies facing each other, little pawns in front. They're the ones who get sacrificed first. The king and the queen. You know, the queen, his, you know, chief of staff, and, you know, it was kind of, you know, the social order personified on that board. So it had great social meaning at the time.
So would you say that putting chess on the map is what distinguishes Bobby Fischer from other fallen heroes who, you know, rose to the top very early and then had a very, you know, a public and sort of revealing downfall later in life?
Yeah, I mean, he did put chess on the map for America. He changed the profession of chess. He made it into a profession. I mean, when Bobby was coming up, he had to play 20 people at a time to make, $15. You had to work yourself like a dog in order to make a living at chess. His demands were seemed outlandish at the time, but he demanded more prize money. He demanded decent conditions, and he was branded as difficult and arrogant. But in fact, he paved the way for other chess players to do chess as a professional sport.
And the film also shows that the press had almost a love-hate relationship with him. He was a good story, and yet he wasn't very accommodating at times. So do you think the press treated him differently than the way the press would treat like sort of a bad boy rock star today?
I think that there are some similarities between today's celebrities who are kind of stalked and their every foible kind of poured over. Of course, there was no TMZ in 1972 and no internet. But Bobby he did have that love-hate relationship with the press. People accused him of his colossal egotism, he behaved like a child, but at the same time, everybody wanted a picture of him, everybody wanted him on their show. So yeah, I mean, he was sought after and also made fun of. And, and that was tough for a person with a psychology like Bobby, which was somewhat undeveloped, without like a real stable kind of family unit in place, and a child getting so much attention so young. It's a lot to swallow.
And in your interviews with the people that knew Bobby, did some sort of psychological profile come through? I mean, could he be characterized in some way psychologically?
I mean, a lot of people have tried to sort of diagnose Bobby from a distance, and we'll never know what a professional would have given, what diagnosis a professional would have given Bobby at after having examined him for some period of time. Clearly, later in life, he was overrun by paranoid thoughts and delusions, and some people said when he was young he displayed aspects of Asperger's. Would he now be diagnosed with Asperger's? We don't know. We know that parts of Bobby were very underdeveloped. Socially, his love relationships, all of those things were not fully developed because his whole development was chess, he didn't have the space for those other things in his life.
So I guess shifting gears from his success with chess, after he gave up the title, and his life after that, was there still interest in his personal life, especially as his neuroses or psychotic behavior came through? Was that something that the press then focused on?
After, in 1975, Bobby refused to defend his title, thereby forfeiting it, and Karpov became the new world champion. Then that went to Kasparov, and Kasparov then was world champion for 15 years. We interviewed him in the film. As Bobby sort of receded from the chess world, he receded from the public view. I mean, people would do stories, where is Bobby Fischer? We spotted him at a chess club. He looked, disheveled, and people would see him riding buses in Pasadena, or there would be stories of Bobby Fischer sightings. But he really tried to stay away from public view. Ultimately, he emerged again in 1992 to play revenge mask against Spassky, and the reason for that was really money. He needed money, and he played Spassky, in Yugoslavia, where there was a genocide going on, and there were U.S. sanctions against the country. So Bobby was indicted, and ultimately, after 1992, became a fugitive from America, and was picked up in Japan after he made some very unsavory comments about 9/11, and he was put in prison. So Bobby sort of became of interest again after those comments around 9/11, and the U.S. decided to really enforce that indictment against him and put him in jail.
So I guess, do you think the film has an overall message about fame or about chasing people in the way that the public sort of idolized Bobby and then left him? Or
I mean, I think that you'll see, when people watch this film, they'll see parallels between, what happens to celebrities, especially those who become so publicly scrutinized so young. But I think that that, you know, it's so many different factors that go into creating a character like Bobby Fischer: the social, the political, the cultural implications, his own family environment, and psychology within his own family, and, you know, his relationships with his parents. So it's really, he had such a fascinating life and so many different influences to produce who he was. And, you know, I'd say if there was a message, you know, it's, you know, even Bobby, he says, you know, in an interview that was very revealing, he says, you know, yeah, maybe it would have been better for me to be a little more well-rounded, he says casually. And I think, you know, maybe that was an insight of his that's worth paying attention to.
Thank you for joining us, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Bobby Fischer Against the World airs on HBO.